Welcome to another reading in isolation. I know it looks like I'm in Bali, doesn't it? That's my cat. Let me just remove the toy real quick. This is it. There you go. All right. The music in the background. So my name is Samanju Rod and welcome to another reading of 1001 Nights. The music in the background was composed specifically for this project by Mr. Kamyab Sadeghi. And I'll be reading right now. Hold on, where's the button? There it is. All right. Let's all get comfortable, shall we? Don't you just love this little plant? Little. It's huge, actually. All right. I hope it doesn't bother. It really does a little bit. This. Oh, that's much better, isn't it? Welcome and enjoy the reading. Now, when it was the 230th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Amjad awaited his brother Asad till midday, and he returned not to him, Amjad's vitals fluttered. The pangs of parting were sore upon him, and he poured forth abundant tears, exclaiming, 'Alas, my brother! Alas, my friend! Alas, my grief! How I feared me we should be separated!' Then he descended from the mountain top, with the tears running down his cheeks, and entering the city, ceased not walking till he made the market. He asked the folk the name of the place and concerning its people, and they said, 'This is called the city of the Magians, and its citizens are mostly given to fire worshipping in lieu of the omnipotent king.' Then he inquired of the city of Ebony, and they answered, 'Of a truth, it is a year's journey thither by land, and 6 months by the sea.' It was governed erst by a king called Amanus, but he took to son-in-law and made king in his stead a prince called Kamar-al-Zaman, distinguished for justice and munificence, equity and benevolence. When Amjad heard tell of his father, he groaned and wept and lamented and knew not whither to go. However, he bought us something of food and carried it to a retired spot, where he sat down, thinking to eat. But recalling his brother, he fell a-weeping and swallowed but a morsel to keep breath and body together, and that against his will. Then he rose and walked about the city, seeking news of his brother, till he saw a Muslim tailor sitting in his shop. So he sat down by him and told him his story, whereupon quoth the tailor, 'If he have fallen into the hands of the Magians, thou shalt hardly see him again. Yet it may be Allah will reunite you twain. But thou, O my brother,' he continued, 'wilt thou lodge with me?' Amjad answered, 'Yes,' and the tailor rejoiced at this. So he abode with him many days, what while the tailor comforted him and exhorted him to patience, and taught him tailoring, till he became expert in the craft. Now one day he went forth to the seashore and washed his clothes. Excuse me. It's a really funny story. After which he entered the bath and put on clean raiment. Then he walked about the city to divert himself with its sights, and presently there met him on the way a woman of passing beauty and loveliness, without peer for grace and comeliness. When she saw him, she raised her face veil and signed to him by moving her eyebrows and her eyes with luring glances, and versified these couplets. 'I drooped my glance when seen thee on the way, as though, O slim waist felt by sol's hot ray. Thou art the fairest fair that ever appeared, fairer today than fair of yesterday. Were beauty parted, a fifth part of it, with Joseph or a part of fifth would stay. The rest would fly to thee, thine ownest own, be every soul thy sacrifice, I pray. When Amjad heard these words, they gladdened his heart, which inclined to her, and his bowels yearned towards her, and the hands of love sported with him. So he sighed to her in reply and spoke these couplets. Above the rose of cheek is thorn of lance, who dareth pluck it, rashest Shavizan? Stretch not thy hand towards it for a night long, those lances mar because we snatched a glance. Say her who tyrant is and tempter too, though justice might her tempting power enhance. Thy face would add to errors were it veiled. Unveiled I see its God hath best of chance. I cannot look upon soul's naked face, but can when mist cloud dims his countenance. The honey hive is held by honey bee. Ask the tribe guards what wants their vigilance. And they would slay me, let them end the air, rancorous and grant us freely to advance. They're not more murderous and charge the whole than charging glance of her who wears the mole. And hearing these lines from Amjad, she sighed with the deepest sigh, and signing to him again, repeated these couplets. 'Tis thou hast trodden coyness path, not I. Grant me thy favours, for the time draws nigh. O thou who makest morn with light of brow, and with loose brow locks night and liftest eye. Thine idle aspect made of me thy slave, tempting as temptedst me in days gone by. 'Tis just my liver fry with hottest love, who worship fire for God must fire abide. Thou sellest like of me for worthless price, if thou must sell, ask high of those who buy. When Amjad heard these words, he said to her, Wilt thou come to my lodging, or shall I go with thee to thine? So she hung her head in shame to the ground, and repeated the words of him whose name be exalted. Man shall have the preeminence above women, because of those advantages wherein Allah hath caused the one of them to excel the other. Upon this, Amjad took the hint, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now when it was the 231st night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Amjad took the woman's hint and understood that she wished to go with him whither he was going. He felt himself bounden to find a place wherein to receive her, but was ashamed to carry her to the house of his host, the tailor. So he walked on, and she walked after him. And the two ceased not walking from street to street, at place to place, till she was tired, and said to him, O my lord, where is thy house? Answered he, Before us a little way. Then he turned aside into a handsome by-street, followed by the young woman, and walked on till he came to the end, when he found it was no thoroughfare, and exclaimed, There is no majesty and there is no might save in Allah, the glorious, the great. Then, raising his eyes, he saw, at the upper end of the lane, a great door with 2 stone benches, but it was locked. So Amjad sat down on one of the benches, and she on the other. And she said to him, O my lord, wherefore waitest thou? He bowed his head a while to the ground, then raised it and answered, I am awaiting my Mameluke who hath the key. For I bade him make me ready meat and drink and flowers, to deck the wine service against my return from the bath. But he said to himself, Haply the time will be tedious to her, and she will go about her business, leaving me here when I will wend my own way. However, as soon as she was weary of long waiting, she said, O my lord, thy Mameluke delayeth, and here are we sitting in the street. And she arose, and took a stone, and went up to the lock. Said Amjad, Be not in haste, but have patience till the servant come. However, she hearkened not to him, but smote the wooden bolt with a stone, and broke it in half, whereupon the door opened. Quoth he, What possessed thee to do this deed? Quoth she, Pooh, pooh, my lord, what matter it? Is not the house thy house and thy place? He said, There was no need to break the bolt. Then the damsel entered, to the confusion of Amjad, who knew not what to do for fear of the people of the house. But she said to him, Why dost thou not enter, O light of mine eyes and core of my heart? Replied he, I hear and I obey. But my servant tarrieth long, and I know not if he have done aught of what I bade him, and specially enjoined upon him or not. Hereupon he entered, sore in fear of the people of the house, and found himself in a handsome saloon with 4 dazed recesses, each facing other, and containing closets and raised seats, all bespread with stuffs of silk and brocade. And in the midst was a jetting fountain of costly fashion, on whose margin rested a covered tray of meats, with a leather tablecloth hanging up, and jam-encrusted dishes full of fruits and sweet-scented flowers. Hard by stood drinking vessels and a candlestick with a single wax candle therein. And the place was full of precious stuffs, and was ranged with chests and stools, and on each seat lay a parcel of clothes, upon which was a purse full of monies, gold and silver. The floor was paved with marble, and the house bore witness in every part to its owner's fortune. When Amjad saw all of this, he was confounded at his case, and said to himself, I am a lost man. Verily, we are, alas, and to Allah we are returning. As for the damsel, when she sighted the place, she rejoiced indeed with a joy nothing could exceed, and said to him, By Allah, O my lord, thy servant hath not failed of his duty. For see, he hath swept the place, and cooked the meat, and set on the fruit, and indeed I come at the best of times. But he paid no heed to her, his heart being taken up with fear of the housefolk, and she said, Fie, O my lord, O my heart, what aileth thee to stand thus? Then she sighed, and giving him a buss which sounded like the cracking of a walnut, said, O my lord, and thou have made an appointment with other than with me, I will gird my middle and serve her and thee. Amjad laughed from a heart full of rage and wrath, and came forwards and sat down, panting and saying to himself, Alack, mine ill death and doom when the owner of the place shall return. Then she seated herself by him, and fell to toying and laughing, whilst Amjad sat careful and frowning, thinking 1,000 thoughts and communing with himself. Shortly the master of the house cannot but come, and then what shall I say to him? He needs must kill me, and my life will be lost thus foolishly. Presently she rose, and tucking up her sleeves, took a tray of food, on which she laid the cloth, and then set it before Amjad, and began to eat, saying, Eat, O my lord. So he came forward and ate, but the food was not pleasant to him. On the contrary, he ceased not to look towards the door, till the damsel had eaten her fill. When she took away the tray of the meats and, setting on the dessert, fell to eating of the dried fruits. Then she brought the wine service, and opening the jar, filled a cup and handed it to Amjad, who took it from her hand, saying to himself, "Ah, ah, and well away when the master of the house cometh and seeth me." And he kept his eyes fixed on the threshold, even with cup in hand. While he was in this case, lo, in came the master of the house, who was a white slave, one of the chief men of the city, being master of the horse to the king. He had fitted up this saloon for his pleasures, that he might make merry therein and be private with whom he would. And he had that day bidden a youth whom he loved, and had made this entertainment for him. Now the name of the slave was Bahadur, and he was open of hand, generous, munificent, and fain of almsgiving and charitable works. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. And here's the last one for tonight. Now when it was the 232nd night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Bahadur, the master of the horse and the owner of the house, came to the door of the saloon and found it open, he entered slowly and softly, and looking in with head advanced and outstretched neck, saw Amjad and the girl sitting before the dish of fruit and the wine jar in front of them. Now Amjad at that moment had the cup in his hand and his face turned to the door, and when his glance met Bahadur's eyes, his hue turned pale yellow, and his side muscles quivered. So seeing his trouble, Bahadur signed to him with his finger on his lips, as much as to say, "Be silent and come hither to me." Whereupon he set down the cup and rose, and the damsel cried, "Whither away?" He shook his head, and signing to her that he wished to make water, went out into the passage barefoot. Now when he saw Bahadur, he knew him for the master of the house. So he hastened to him, and kissing his hand, said to him, "Allah upon thee, O my lord, ere thou do me a hurt, hear what I have to say." Then he told him who he was, from first to last, and acquainted him with what caused him to quit his native land and royal state, and how he had not entered this house of his free will, but that it was the girl who had broken the lock-bolt and done all this. When Bahadur heard his story and knew that he was a king's son, he felt for him, and taking compassion on him, said, "Hearken to me, O Amjad, and do what I bid thee, and I will guarantee thy safety from that thou fearest. But if thou cross me, I will kill thee." Amjad replied, "Command me as thou wilt. I will not gainsay thee in aught, no, never, for I am the freedman of thy bounty." Rejoined Bahadur, "Then go back forthwith into the saloon. Sit down in thy place, and be at peace and at thine ease. I will presently come in to thee, and when thou seest me, remember my name is Bahadur. Do thou revile me, and rail at me, and saying, 'What made thee tarry till so late?' and accept no excuse from me, nay, so far from it, rise and beat me. And if thou spare me, I will do away thy life. Enter now, and make merry, and whatsoever thou seekest of me at this time, I will bring thee forthwith. And do thou spend this night as thou wilt, and on the morrow wend thy way. This I do in honour of thy strangerhood, for I love the stranger and hold myself bounden to do him devoir. So Amjad kissed his hand, and returning to the saloon with his face clad in its natural white and red, at once said to the damsel, O my mistress, thy presence hath gladdened this thine own place, and ours is indeed a blessed night. Quoth the girl, Verily I see a wonderful change in thee, that thou now welcomest me so cordially. So Amjad answered, By Allah, O my lady, methought my servant Bahadur had robbed me of some necklaces of jewels, worth 10,000 dinars each. However, when I went out, but now, in concern for this, I sought for them and found them in their place. I know not why the slave tarrieth so long, and needs must I punish him for it. She was satisfied with his answer, and they sported and drank and made merry and ceased not to be so till near sundown, when Bahadur came in to them, having changed his clothes and girt his middle, and put on shoes such as are worn of Mamelukes. He saluted and kissed the ground, then held his hands behind him and stood with his head hanging down as one who confesseth to a fault. So Amjad looked at him with angry eyes and asked, Why hast thou tarried till now, O most pestilent of slaves? Answered Bahadur, O my lord, I was busy washing my clothes and knew not of thy being here, for our appointed time was nightfall and not daytide. But Amjad cried out at him, saying, Thou liest, O vilest of slaves. By Allah, I must needs beat thee. So he rose, and throwing Bahadur prone on the ground, took a stick and beat him gently. But the damsel sprang up, and snatching the stick from his hand, came down upon Bahadur so lustily that in extreme pain the tears ran from his eyes, and he ground his teeth together and called out for succor. Whilst Amjad cried out to the girl, Don't! And she cried out, Let me satisfy my anger upon him. Till at last he pulled the stick out of her hand and pushed her away. So Bahadur rose and, wiping away his tears from his cheeks, waited upon them the while, after which he swept the hall and lighted the lamps. But as often as he went in and out, the lady abused him and cursed him, till Amjad was wroth with her and said, For Almighty Allah's sake, leave my Mameluke, he is not used to this. Then they sat and ceased not eating and drinking, and Bahadur waiting upon them, till midnight, when being weary with service and beating, he fell asleep in the midst of the hall, and snored, whereupon the damsel, who was drunken with wine, said to Amjad, Arise, take the sword hanging yonder, and cut me off this slave's head, and if thou do it not, I will be the death of thee. What possesseth thee to slay my slave? Asked Amjad. And she answered, Our joyance will not be complete but by his death. If thou wilt not kill him, I will do it myself. Quoth Amjad, By Allah's rights to thee, do not this thing. Quoth she, It must perforce be. And taking down the sword, drew it and made at Bahadur to kill him. But Amjad said in his mind, This man hath entreated us courteously and sheltered us and done us kindness and made himself my slave. Shall we requite him by slaughtering him? This shall never be. Then he said to the woman, If my Mameluke must be killed, better I should kill him than thou. So saying, he took the sword from her, and raising his hand, smote her on the neck and made her head fly from her body. it fell upon Bahadur, who awoke and sat up and opened his eyes when he saw Amjad standing by him, and in his hand the sword dyed with blood, and the damsel lying dead. He inquired what had passed, and Amjad told him all she had said, adding, "Nothing would satisfy her, but she must slay thee, and this is her reward." Then Bahadur rose and, kissing the prince's hand, said to him, "Would to heaven thou hadst spared her. But now there is nothing for it but to rid us of her without stay or delay before the daybreak." Then he girded his loins and took the body, wrapped it in an Abba cloak, and laying it in a large basket of palm leaves, he shouldered it, saying, "Thou art a stranger here, and knowest no one. So sit thou in this place, and await my return till daybreak. If I come back to thee, I will assuredly do thee great good service, and use my endeavours to have news of thy brother. But if by sunrise I return not, know that all is over with me, and peace be on thee, and the house and all it containeth of stuffs and money are thine." Then he fared forth from the saloon, bearing the basket, and threading the streets he made for the salt sea, thinking to throw it therein. But as he drew near the shore, he turned and saw that the chief of police and his officers had ranged themselves around him, and on recognizing him, they wondered and opened the basket, wherein they found the slain woman. So they seized him and laid him in bilboes all that night till the morning, when they carried him and the basket, as it was, to the king and reported the case. The king was sore enraged when he looked upon the slain, and said to Bahadur, "Woe to thee! Thou art always so doing. Thou killest folk and castest them into the sea and takest their goods. How many murders hast thou done ere this?" Thereupon Bahadur hung his head. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. What a story, a dramedy. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for the hi. Hi, Omar. And Sami, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Sami Nazri, thanks for the roses, for the hearts and the likes. It was a pure joy. I hope you enjoyed my little lovely plant. Wishing you a wonderful night, a beautiful morning, a superb afternoon, wherever you are in this world. And as usual, remember to go inwards instead of outwards. I'll see you next week.